Extended coverage as Israel expands Operation Brother's Keeper in search of the 3 kidnapped teens. Israeli security forces raid Nablus and continue arrest of Hamas members as the families of the missing teens meet. The fight in Iraq approaches Baghdad. Troops of the Iraqi army engaged in heavy clashes with Sunni Islamist militants 60 kilometers from the capital city. In Brazil, all the teams will conclude their first game in the World Cup tournament today. The highlight when host Brazil is matched up against Mexico. Good evening. We begin tonight with extended coverage of Israel's Operation Brother's Keeper, the manhunt to retrieve 3 teenagers kidnapped on Thursday night in the Gush Etzion settlement block. The operation has been expanded with over 200 Palestinians, mostly members of Hamas, arrested in the search over the past few days. Alongside it, the Israeli Prime Minister has convened a security cabinet on a daily basis to evaluate the government's next steps. And joining me tonight in the studio is Amir Oren, defense and government analyst for Arts Daily newspaper. Good evening. And also, of course, all our correspondents will be on the ground. And of course, we will continue this coverage with more and more analysts. Amir, what is the latest news that we can say? Because we're analyzing the situation every single day. What can we say today?
First of all, the close circle of those with a need to know and with the highest security clearance is very, very small. And it would be preposterous for anyone outside of this circle to pretend to know exactly what has been learned in the investigation. But from the indications on the ground, it seems that while there is possibly some progress in the investigation, and that the investigators, the security service personnel are closing in on some outer circle surrounding the squad which perpetrated the kidnapping, there has not been any breakthrough, and the Israeli Defense Forces starts preparing the ground for a long-range operation.
We will get back and we will expand, of course, this issue. But with me right now from near Hebron is I-24 News correspondent Eli Ochenberg. Good evening, Eli. So, Eli, what is the latest in the ground, in the field there in Hebron? Again, every single night we see that the situation there is relatively quiet.
Yes, Lucy, well, a relatively quiet day here in the West Bank, but this pretended relaxation is a part of a well-thought strategy. It's part of the realization that this is going to be a long-term operation and that it will take time. The IDF does not want to cause mayhem in the problematic spots in the West Bank, as comfortable as the local residents will feel, as much as they will feel that we're going back to normal, then more information will flow. And we've been talking a lot in recent days about the 2 main missions of this operation. First, of course, to bring back the abducted boys, but the second is how the IDF will harm Hamas, significantly harm Hamas, and this is where the focus is at the moment. How can the IDF cause serious damage to the organization? And another point I would like to address tonight is that the city of Hebron behind me is no longer the main focus of this operation. The IDF has expanded its scale. As we've seen last night in Nablus, the wave of arrest, we can expect more problematic spots in the West Bank to be addressed in the upcoming hour. So the realization that this operation will take longer than expected is making the IDF to think very carefully about every step. And before we will finish, Lucy, just so you will know, until now, almost 800 Palestinian houses has been scanned by the IDF, so we can understand how deep and thorough this operation is.
Yes, and 800 homes and around 200 Palestinians were arrested. Eli Ochenberg, thank you very, very much for this. But before we go further into the discussion, let's take a look at the latest in this developing story from I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev.
On on the 5th day of Operation Brother's Keeper, the color of the target is green. The goal, to achieve a crushing blow to Hamas, which Israel has blamed for the kidnapping of 3 Israeli teenagers last Thursday. As Israeli security forces continue the massive manhunt to locate the 3 kidnapped students, decision makers are seeking ways to topple Hamas's infrastructure in the West Bank.
Anybody who supports peace must tell the Palestinian Authority that they cannot build a government that is backed by the kidnappers of children and the murderers of innocents.
Since the kidnapping Thursday night, Israeli forces have arrested more than 200 Palestinians, including dozens of senior Hamas members. Overnight, the operation continued, spreading north from the city of Hebron to the Nablus region, with several disturbances and clashes across the West Bank. While efforts are focused on the West Bank, Gaza, too, is at unrest. Following rocket fire from the Gaza Strip into Israel, the IDF launched airstrikes against 4, quote, terrorist targets, end quote, in the Strip. Alongside the military pressure, the Israeli Security Cabinet convened Tuesday to discuss more measures that would pressure Hamas to release the 3 teenagers, and decided to worsen the conditions of Hamas inmates in Israeli prisons. Additional punitive steps against Hamas are being weighed, including the deportation of the group's leaders and demolition of their homes.
For Hamas, they have a very clear choice to make. There cannot be a choice that has a political engagement on the one hand and violence on the other. And the only way this is ever going to work is if all violence stops. The terrorism, the kidnappings, the killings.
Meanwhile, on the ground, security coordination with the Palestinian Authority is constructive, and Jerusalem is hoping that Hamas's involvement in the kidnapping will place the unity pact with Fatah at risk.
In my opinion, what they're doing are acts of collective punishment against the whole Palestinian people. And in my opinion, even in the case of the 3 settlers that are missing, the criminal responsibility is on the side of Netanyahu and his government.
The Israeli Prime Minister, in ongoing consultation mode, has vowed that Israel would leave no stone unturned in the effort to bring the boys back home. At the moment, the working assumption is that they are still alive, but every hour that goes by without a sign of life raises grave concerns.
Yes, and joining us right now in the studio is Colonel in the Reserves, Miri Eisen. Good evening, former international media advisor to Israeli Prime Minister. Thank you very much for joining us. These are very hard days for Benjamin Netanyahu. He needs to be updated about every single detail of this operation, and at the same time, he needs to update the Israeli citizens about what is going on, and the Israeli citizens don't get enough information about what exactly is going on. So how does he manage this between knowing and letting the people know?
I think that the biggest challenge right now in that sense is I'm sure he knows lots of things that he's not telling us. And that big challenge for us is how much do you let out that the Israeli people can live with? And I have to tell you right now, I don't think they're letting out enough. I think that we feel that sense when you sit outside. I'm sure that Amir feels that also. You listen to people in coffee shops. Everybody wants to know, so what's going on? And if there is more information, we want to know that. And then I go back both to my military background to having been inside those offices. The reason they're not letting out more information is because that information is pertinent to the pursuit that they're doing. And what we want to do is we want to find these 3 teenagers. We want to get to them as well as we can. And any information we give out, that's going to help out those who kidnapped them rather than the kids themselves.
So we saw a lot of troops walking around and looking and continuing this operation in Hebron. Now they move to Nablus. What does it mean? Because today we've been asking a lot of questions. Is Israel going to occupy or reoccupy the West Bank? And seeing these troops, seeing these images, this is something that we haven't seen for a long, long time. And I think that the Palestinians also are really worried about what is going on right now in the West Bank.
They shouldn't be so worried, because it's true that for the last 10 or at least 9 years, there hasn't been such a concentration of Israeli troops in those cities of the West Bank that you mentioned, Hebron and Nablus. Actually, the last time there was an even bigger concentration was when Israel withdrew from Gaza and from part of Samaria, of the northern West Bank, and it had to pull out the settlers by force. The Israeli government and military are walking a fine line. They don't want to be perceived as punishing the population as a whole, but they do want to put pressure on the population in order for them to put pressure on the leadership of Hamas, in order for the leadership of Hamas to put pressure on those who perpetrated the crime.
And I will ask you just in a moment if the people, the Palestinian, can put pressure on the government, the Palestinian government, because until now they haven't done that. But joining us right now from Israel's Ministry of Defense is in Tel Aviv is I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev. Good evening, Tal. So what steps is Israel taking in the international arena? Because we already saw that Tony Blair spoke and gave a statement.
Good evening, Lucy. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister in the past few days, he's been dividing his time between security updates and diplomatic steps. Since Israel understands it's going into a long-term operation, it also understands that it will need international support to go forward with this operation. And up until yesterday, there was quite a disappointment in Jerusalem with the weak international response. We heard the Prime Minister refer to it himself. But today, the situation seems to be getting a bit better. We have an official statement from the White House condemning the abduction, and also a long-awaited official statement from the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Catherine Ashton, condemning the abduction. In the afternoon, the Israeli Foreign Minister, Avigdor Lieberman, who is currently on a trip to Africa, speaks to the foreign ministers of all the countries that did condemn the kidnap and thanks them for their solidarity. But Israel does have another mission here, and it wants to use the events to delegitimize the Fatah-Hamas unity pact and to rally international support to pressure Abbas to end this pact. Even though there is cooperation on the ground and it's quite successful, and we've heard Israeli officials praise the security cooperation, Israel still stresses that it sees Abbas responsible for the well-being of the 3 kidnapped teenagers. And one of the talking points that is brought up in the discussions between the Israeli diplomats and their counterparts is a Palestinian incitement. Jerusalem is stressing to the world that one of the causes of the terror act is official Palestinian incitement in official Palestinian media and in the education system. And Israel is calling on the world to use the events to pressure Abbas to end this incitement, the terror glorification on the media and in the education systems, and end the pact with Hamas.
Yes, Tal Shalev, thank you very much for this. So is he gaining, let's get back to the question that I asked you, the Palestinians, the Palestinian people, can they affect really the Palestinian government? Because this is what the Israelis are expecting. This is what the Israelis on the street are saying. How come the Palestinians are not getting out and telling Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, do something about it, take us out of this mess?
If this is really the policy, if this is really the goal, it's hopeless. For the population to suffer enough to cry out for Hamas to let Israel find the 3 teenagers and get rid of the problems, this is going to take a long, long time. The Palestinian population in the villages and towns can survive on meager rations for far longer than what Israel can do in order to keep so many army brigades in the West Bank. So Israel is now emphasizing the long-range goals of this operation to weaken Hamas, and therefore they concede that this is a tactical victory for Hamas, but they say that strategically it is going to be a defeat because of what Tal has just reported regarding the Abbas-Hamas unity government.
Mm-hmm. I actually, in this case, slightly differ. I think that the Palestinians do have something to lose. I think that they have seen from 2005, from the change in government, from the differences that have happened from the Israeli side, the change in their economy, the rebuilding of structures, the building of a new city, the opening up of different things that are happening throughout the West Bank, the distinction between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. We've tried to do that. We've tried through that to impact what they do. And I think that they do have something to lose. That doesn't mean, sadly perhaps, that they're going to stand up now and turn in the Hamas. Because we always have to remember, when we look at it from, do they have to lose, will they support, it's a very democratic question. But the answer is not really a democratic answer, because within the arena that they live in, if they turn in somebody from the Hamas, they're going to be murdered. It isn't a place where they have the strict rule of law and that it's just going to be, I'm turning them in and I'm doing the right thing.
What leverage do they have?
in that sense, they do have that quiet leverage, which I think is the equivalent of the southern Lebanese. I don't think we ever saw the Shiites in southern Lebanon as having any type of leverage, but they also suffered in the Second Lebanon War to the degree where nowadays Hezbollah thinks many, many, many times before doing something against Israel from there. And I think that there is an equivalent in the West Bank. I say it's very different in the Gaza Strip. There, I do wonder if they have anything to lose. But I think
international law would block Israel, and the way Israel perceives international law is blocking it. And one example is the treatment of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. We have heard that the Israeli Minister of Public Security was given authority to worsen the conditions of the prisoners. In reality, what it means is taking away the bonus meetings with relatives and others.
I want to hear what the Palestinians has to say if the point that you just put here is something that the Palestinians are thinking about. With me now from Hebron is human rights researcher Hisham Sharbati. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us. So Hisham, I'm trying to understand the Palestinians. Do they understand that they have a lot to lose from this operation, from this current situation? And how come we don't see Palestinians on the streets and in the streets and in the media saying to Abu Mazen, get us out of this mess. This is too big. We have a lot to lose.
Actually, I did not get the question. Will you please repeat that again?
Yes, I'm saying that why we don't hear the Palestinians on the street saying to Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas that he needs to finish this because they have a lot to lose.
Yeah, maybe from one side they have a lot to move. That the Palestinians believe that they need things, or they are willing to gain things from this if it is a real kidnapping incident. The point is that, in many occasions in the past, there were prisoners swaps, or there were even crops swap between the Israeli government and the Palestinian different resistance groups. And this is one of the things that the people hope to have if it is, as I said, a real kidnapping issue, because also many of the Palestinians also think that there is another possibility that it could be also a disappearance based on criminal.
But Hisham, really, this is the way that you want to take out your prisoners from prison. This is the way that you want to be to present yourselves out there to the world, kidnapping teenagers, kidnapping young boys in order to take out Palestinians who are right now in the Israeli prison?
I tell you what the people believe in the street. There was an agreement between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government to release certain number of prisoners. The Palestinian Authority president even said that the Israelis know that we have given them this certain list of names, and they have agreed to release them. And then at the end, the Israeli Authority did not fulfill their commitments, and so for long, the peace process was stuck, and there was no breakthrough in it. In addition to the issue of the administrative detainees,
are the Palestinians scared? Hisham, are the Palestinians, let's put it just straight ahead, are the Palestinians scared to speak because they're afraid to lose their lives from Hamas military wing, from Fatah military wing, from, I don't know, are you afraid to say what's on your mind because you are afraid to lose your lives?
No. Let me tell you something. I'm not worried of anything. What I'm trying to tell is that what the people believe in. Okay, there are some people, there are people who are worried of certain things. There are other people who say, we are going back to this situation, this difficult situation that we have experienced many times before during the invasion in 2002, during the first Intifada, during during, at the mid-90s when there were lots of, suicide bombings inside Israel.
Yes,
and
so just let me just remind you that the second Intifada for a lot of Palestinians, and they're saying it until now, it was a huge, huge mistake. Thank you very much for now for this, Hisham Sharbati.
No, I'm talking about the Israeli restrictions on the area. I'm not talking about the step itself. Of course, there is lots of criticism of many of the things that happened during the second Intifada.
Okay, Hisham Sharbati.
But the Palestinians also, they don't have one viewpoint about anything.
Yes, maybe this is the problem. Hisham Sharbati, thank you very much for this.
It's really regrettable because this is beyond politics. Political leaders come and go. But the public in Israel, when it perceives the Palestinian public to be cheering the kidnappers, even though the Palestinian public was not part of the crime, but now having done it, they cheer this crime, and then some of them are having these science fiction scenarios of perhaps it wasn't really an abduction. This is one sure way to lose support even within the Israeli left.
How does the international media is covering this story? How is the international media is actually, because you sat here 2 days ago and you said, okay, we're not alone in this world. In Nigeria, 200 girls are abducted. In Syria, babies are being murdered. Things in Iraq, the situation there is terrifying. We are not alone in the world, and I believe that maybe the world, when they're looking at the situation here in Israel, they're saying, I'm going to say it, what's the big deal? What are you talking about?
First of all, Lucy, you know what? This is something which is Israeli. We want to bring the world into it. But the event that's happening right now, the fact that for the last 5 days, every single person in Israel knows the name of these 3 young men that we can see on the screen, that everybody around in Israel is talking about it in coffee shops, that is Israel. And to a certain degree, you know what? We are different from other places. Having said that, as I'm seeing it played out right now in the international media, there is a change. And that change of tone is, as far as I'm concerned, for one of the things that Israel has invested in. They have reached out, they have been stating, they have been demanding to a certain degree acknowledgement that 3 teenagers can't be abducted when they hitchhike on their way home. And you can't take that out of context in any way, that you can't take out of context what was just said right now in a sort of subtle way, that we have prisoners that were put on trial into prisons for prison sentences for acts that they were arrested for and then put in jail. And it's being equivalent to abducting 3 teenagers from a hitchhiking station and not saying anything about what happens to them. That type of equivalence in the Western media right now, we're not seeing, okay? It's sadly, in a lot of the Arab media, I've been following both in Al Jazeera, in the Saudi, in the different ones, the framing is a little challenging for me as an Israeli, but I am glad that in the Western media right now, it's slowly focusing on the heart issues. Even if they don't get why we're so interested in it, it is going into that way.
Yes, so I would let you just say something about it, but we just talked about the international media. Let's talk about the Israeli media. Ever since the news of the current kidnapping crisis broke last Friday, the issue has dominated the Israeli media and pushed other news stories from the headlines. Of course, I-24 News reporter Shai Ben Ali takes a look at how the Israeli news media has covered the story.
As Israel's security forces conduct a massive operation in the West Bank to search for 3 kidnapped boys, the Israeli media has been on overdrive since Friday afternoon when news first leaked of an apparent kidnapping.
Tonight on the news, a suspected kidnapping, Gilad Sher, Naftali Frankel, and Eyal Ifrach are the 3 yeshiva students missing for over 46 hours.
As is almost customary when such an event occurs in Israel, the major Israeli channels switch to almost non-stop news coverage of the ongoing crisis.
In the cabinet and government, there's an overwhelming majority against any deal whatsoever, if one is demanded. This cabinet's position will be to support an operation to release the hostages if it is indeed a kidnapping.
While every news update is frantically rushed to air, no matter how minor, these broadcasts can often be repetitive and monotonous, a never-ending stream of words intended to satisfy Israelis' notorious thirst for news and information.
We must admit there is not a lot of information at this stage, 24 hours after the disappearance of 3 boys on their way home.
Complicating things further is the fact that the crisis began just as the biggest sporting event in the world was getting underway, the World Cup in Brazil. Israel may not have qualified, but there is no shortage of football fans in Israel, and many find themselves switching between news coverage of the kidnapping and high-class international football. It's a situation typical of Israeli society, which almost traditionally swings from one extreme to another. The constant coverage also raises certain questions regarding the potential dangers of revealing so much of the Israeli mindset to anyone who cares to watch. In a sense, the Israeli psyche has been on public display over the past few days, and Israel's enemies are also among the audience. In this respect, it is interesting to note that the recent release of American POW, Bo Bergdahl, for 5 Taliban prisoners became possible partly because the U.S. media almost entirely ignored the story up until his release. Gilad Shalit's release from Hamas captivity became possible only after Israel agreed to release more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners following an intensive media campaign. It remains to be seen if the current media coverage will have implications on the fate of the 3 kidnapped boys.
So we are seeing that the international media, of course, is covering the story, and of course also the Israeli media. You wanted to say something about
yes,
the international media?
Yes, you know that in the Middle East, they usually do not start revolutions during Olympics or World Cup years. Yesterday, when Prime Minister Netanyahu chose to address the media, he found the appropriate time, 6:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the Germany
game.
Germany, of course, versus Portugal game, because he knew that if he waited until prime time, all eyes would be glued to the sports channel rather than to his own address. So part of the Israeli public is, of course, following the story, the sad story of what is happening, the mystery. But there is another part of the Israeli public which goes about its daily business, its daily routine, and is fixated on the World Cup rather than on the West Bank.
And you know what I have to say also to the Israeli media right now? There are enormous events that are happening here in the Middle East that are almost on our doorstep. And we're fixated, and I understand and I look at them. And I right now am becoming more and more critical of the fact that we're here and we're doing this, and we're not looking at what's happening right now in Iraq, its impact on Syria.
We will look at the second part
Jordan.
of our evening edition.
We are as provincial as any other place.
We are not that provincial here, but I have to say that let's open it a little bit, and this is what we're going to discuss in the second part of this edition. What is happening right now in the Middle East, what is happening right now in the Arab world is very worrying. Isn't it a little bit worrying that right now all the troops, all the IDF forces, all the eyes are on one part of the country and maybe forgetting what is happening in the north, maybe forgetting what is happening in Egypt, maybe forgetting. Are they forgetting?
No, I'm going to step in right here and say that the intelligence community is not fixated. It knows how to focus, and it knows how to multitask. And thank God for that. And our intelligence community knows how to multitask and very much knows what's going on all around. Not all of the forces right now are in the West Bank. We have other capabilities and forces. We're very aware of the threats and the implications, by the way, of the events right now, both on the northern Syrian border and on the Egyptian border. And I definitely feel in that sense that we're looking at it broadly.
Lucy, not all of your viewers throughout the world are aware of how small Israel really is and how able it is to work in interior lines. It's very versatile to shift forces from the West Bank to the Lebanese border or to Gaza. It's only an hour's drive or 15 minutes by helicopter.
Yeah, and maybe to the viewers in the United States, it's just like a really, really, really small suburb.
It's New Jersey. Usually they say it's New Jersey.
It's New Jersey. So if you want to imagine Israel equivalent to New Jersey. And now start understanding how much noise we're doing it all around the world. Miri Eisen and Emil Owen, thank you very much for coming and explaining more about the current situation. Of course, you're going to continue being with us in the next next few days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
And we're going out for a small break, 2 minutes break, and then we will come back with the rest of the news, also Iraq, also Iran, what is happening all around the globe. Don't go. Extended coverage as Israel expands Operation Brother's Keeper in search of the 3 kidnapped teens. Israeli security forces raid Nablus and continue arrests of Hamas members as the families of the missing teens meet. The fight in Iraq approaches Baghdad. Troops of the Iraqi army engaged in heavy clashes with Sunni Islamist militants 60 kilometers from the capital city. And in Brazil, all the teams will conclude their first game in the World Cup tournament today. The highlight, when host Brazil is matched up against Mexico. And we move now from the crisis brewing in Israel and the West Bank to the rest of the world, specifically to the threat stemming from the radical militants. It's an issue relevant from Kenya, where the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab carried out another deadly attack today, to Nigeria, where the Islamist Boko Haram continues its violent path against Western society, to Iraq, torn apart by the ISIL, and rising debate on military intervention. Today on the Daily Question, we ask you, can the use of military force reduce the threat of radical militants? And joining me, like every night, is I-24 News editor Naveed Zanger.
Good evening.
Good evening. And also retired Colonel Richard Camp, former commander of British forces in Afghanistan. Good evening, Colonel Camp. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good evening.
So we will get back to you just in a short while, but before that, let's
start with the poll, which was extremely definitive today. I-24 News viewers globally, a whopping 89% said yes. Wow. Military force can reduce the threat of radical militants. Only 10% said no. A lot of within this and within our viewers' comments is the questions: how much, who do you arm, when do you intervene, and so on. So let's take a look, get right into it. And to those who said that the majority, that military force can make a change, Dav said yes, but the problem is not the Islamist groups. The real problem is how to cut the refueling of arms. They must attack the thing at its root. Just today, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, said that this situation in Iraq is actually highlighting the biggest problem, which is the funding of terrorism. So I think that's an important point that our viewers brought up. Jacqueline said that, yes, the use of military force can be a deterrent to Islamist groups. Presence on the ground can reduce the influence of Islamists and prevent the spread of threatening groups, and also they can monitor and effectively destroy weapons. This, of course, is a complex issue that maybe Colonel Richard Kemp can speak about, because which troops and which countries' troops are willing to go into a place like Syria, a place like Iraq, and so on, and effectively monitor and combat these militants when they're in the middle of an uprising of sorts?
You know, and also when you send troops, when you send military troops, you risk losing lives. You risk, of course, losing the lives of these troops that are going there and trying to help to resolve the problem. And politically, should you get in? Should you not?
Politically, it's a tough decision that U.S. President Obama keeps facing over and over again. Let's go also to Merrill, who says a big, actually, you know what, sorry, I want to go to Eyal first, because he brought up something in Israel, which is always enters the conversation here. Yeah. He says it certainly can. Operation Defensive Shield dramatically reduce bombings and rockets and the capability of Hamas. Words did not. This was an operation in 2002, the biggest in the West Bank since the 1967 Six-Day War. And a lot of Israelis did say after this, this massive spate of suicide bombings and rocket attacks was sharply reduced, and they did what had to be done. That's that perspective.
Let's ask Colonel Richard Camp, do you think that with power, with violence, you can only answer with power and military forces?
I think that there are a number of options that are available, but I think when you're dealing with terrorist groups of the kind we're seeing raising their heads increasingly today from the Islamic world, I think the answer has to be, the fundamental answer has to be with military power. And many of these organizations, they respect strength, they respect power, they understand it, and they respond to it. They don't understand, they don't respond to to what perhaps is sometimes called soft power, diplomatic action, humanitarian assistance, state building, these kind of actions. They don't respond to that so much. They see that as weakness. So I think, yes, the use of military power has proved time and again to be effective in dealing deadly blows to these organizations. We saw it, for example, in Iraq before 2011 when the Americans pulled out. We saw al-Qaeda smashed to pieces in Iraq. We've seen al-Qaeda smashed to pieces in the Pakistan border area by American power as well. So it worked.
Colonel Kemp, is the fight on the ground between troops, between military and terrorist organizations, is different between military against military?
It's a very different situation, and it's very much more difficult because typically, as you have in Israel, in Gaza, in Lebanon, you have terrorist groups who melt in and merge with the civilian population, hide behind the civilian population, use them as human shields. Exactly the same tactics have been used and are being used in Iraq, are being used in Afghanistan. And to try and differentiate, but whereas by and large, military forces, they stand out, they try and conceal themselves, but they don't try and, on the whole, don't try and use civilian populations to shield themselves. They try and protect civilian populations rather than use civilian populations to sacrifice themselves in order to protect the troops. It's the opposite, really. And that is one of the many factors that make it much more difficult to combat the kind of conflict we're talking about.
Yes, Colonel Richard Kemp, thank you very, very much for this explanation.
I think some of what Colonel Kemp said is a good segue to other viewers, what they had to say, because he's saying this asymmetrical warfare that you brought up. We're not talking military against military, and that makes it, as we have learned over the past couple of decades, harder and harder to actually fight and to actually root out. You can, put a Band-Aid on it, but that's it. So other viewers who said military force isn't everything suggested other routes. Komina Anku, for example, says, no, the threat of Islamist groups cannot be reduced without social justice, respect for minority rights, non-interference in the affairs of states. Rachel also added, it's been years that armies have launched operations leading to nothing. One must address the causes: lack of education, poverty, looting of natural resources by other powers, etc., etc. So a lot of people are saying, like some of our viewers, you can't put out fire with gas, looking to the root causes. Of course, it's not only this, but judging by what he said, if you wait too long, military power can't do everything.
And it's amazing what he said, because these terror organizations respect power, they respect fight, and they respect, they expect this as
That's
well.
Something that a lot of times we've had these discussions on these fields in the Daily Question. I really am seeing viewers across the board repeatedly saying, you have to speak the language of the person you're against. If you're fighting terrorists, you have to speak their language.
Yes, and we will speak in an extended way about, of course, the situation in Iraq in our daily debate, and of course, in the rest of the news today. Nuri Tanger, thank you very much for this. And we're going right now to see what is happening right now in Iraq. The turmoil in Iraq continues as fighting persists between Islamist militants and the Iraqi security forces. The United States has bolstered its security presence in the capital as the violence draws nearer, while even discussing cooperation with Iran in an effort to resolve the crisis. I-24 News reporter Shaiban Ari has the story.
The situation in Iraq continues to spiral out of control as on Monday night, the city of Baquba, only 37 miles from the capital of Baghdad, was attacked by militants from the extremist Sunni group, the Islamic State, in Iraq and the Levant. The Iraqi army was able to repel the attack this time, but many fear it is only a matter of time before the militants reach the capital, following their recent conquests, the city of Tel Afar on Monday, as well as Tikrit and Mosul last week. Over the past few days, photos and videos have emerged online that appear to show mass executions of Iraqi soldiers at the hands of ISIL fighters in Saladin province, north of Baghdad. Media organizations have not been able to independently confirm the authenticity of these images. As chaos spreads throughout the country, the government has called on volunteers to rally to the defense of the nation.
We're a little worried because of some of the news channels reporting inaccurate news that question the Iraqi army's capabilities. Such rumors being broadcast will have a negative effect on Iraqis.
Meanwhile, 275 U.S. Army personnel have already arrived in Iraq to bolster security at the American embassy, even as much of its staff is being evacuated from the country. The U.S. has also been moving ships to the Persian Gulf as President Obama contemplates the use of aerial strikes to halt the militant advance. Defense experts have noted that such strikes can be effective if ISL fighters decide to advance towards Baghdad along the main highways. However, if the militants remain in the cities they have already conquered, these operations can quickly become more complex. Another issue being mulled over in Washington is possible cooperation with Iran in an effort to handle the crisis, with U.S. officials even raising the issue at the nuclear talks now being held in Vienna.
We're not talking about coordinating any military action in Iraq with Iran. We would encourage Iran to push the Iraqis to act to address problems in a non-sectarian way.
Indeed, both the U.S. and Iran are insisting that Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, who belongs to the Shiite majority, must do more to reconcile the various ethnic groups that make up Iraqi society. But a confidant of al-Maliki's has emphasized that in Iraq, now is the time for war, not reconciliation.
And with me on set is senior Middle East analyst Ali Waqed. Good evening, Ali.
Good evening, Lucy.
So, Ali, let's try to understand the balance of power between the Sunni and the Shiite right now in Iraq.
First of all, Lucy, I want to refer to the big title of this evening. The Iraqi cabinet officially accuses Saudi Arabia for financing and orchestrating the civil war in Iraq. He accuses the Saudis to support the Sunnite militias and to lead a sectarian war in Iraq. And this is a very dramatic development. The truth is that for the moment, the advantage in the power, at least, is for the Shiite. The Saudi intelligence and other Arab countries are trying to exploit the practice that the ISIL had gained in the Syrian civil war in order to destabilize Iraq. But doing this, they are helping a Salafist group, Al-Qaeda affiliated group, to establish a continuation in the north of Iraq and in some parts of the center of Iraq. So for the moment, we cannot talk about balance. Iraq is still a very majority of Shiites. The power is mainly in the hands of the Shiites. But for the first time since 2003, we are seeing Sunnite militias leading a war which is more than a guerrilla, which is more than terror, a war that seeks to establish some territorial continuation, a war that seeks to present some political demands, and this is the change of the last years.
So let me understand something. What is the difference between the situation in Iraq and the situation in Syria? How come President Barack Obama is basically waking up and saying, okay, maybe we should get back to Iraq, and not do the same in Syria?
The interesting is that this evening also there was a discussion in the Iranian press whether Iran should collaborate with the U.S. In the war in Iraq against the ISIL, or should it act alone with the Iraqi government and not in collaboration with the United States. The fact is that the United States withdrew with Iraq without guaranteeing that the situation is solid, is stable. The Saudian money, the Saudian intelligence, the practice that those militants, those fighters gained in Syria are embarrassing the Iraqi army, which in a couple of days totally collapsed in the north of Iraq. Now the question is, if Obama will accept the Iraqi demand to fight ISIL in the north of Iraq, it means in the borders between Syria and Iraq, the main opponent to Bashar Assad disappears, and stability Bashar Assad is having this front, at least this front, covered from the Syrian and the oppositions.
Okay, Ali Waqed, Senior Middle East Ali Waqed, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
U.S. Special Operation Forces captured one of the suspected ringleaders of the terror attacks in Benghazi over the weekend in a secret raid in Libya. Ahmed Abu Khatala was captured near Benghazi following months of planning. He is reportedly now in U.S. custody, quote, in a secure location outside Libya. The officials said there were no casualties in the operation and that all U.S. personnel involved have safely left Libya. Another day of terror in Kenya as gunmen opened fire in the same region where Sunday's night massacre left around 50 casualties in its wake. The Islamic group Al-Shabaab has taken responsibility for both attacks. I-24 News reporter Uwe Shapiro has more.
A day after a deadly blast that killed at least 50 citizens, Kenya is bleeding once again. At least 15 people died Monday night near the coastal city of Pekentoni, the same area of the previous attack. The Al-Qaeda-linked organization Al-Shabaab has taken responsibility for both attacks. However, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta blames a local political network in the attacks.
The attack in Lamu was well planned, orchestrated, and politically motivated ethnic violence.
Al-Shabaab, or the youth terror organization, was formed in 2006 in Somalia and contains between 4,000 to 9,000 militants. The organization increased its activity in Kenya in 2011 after the country sent troops to neighboring Somalia to help the weak UN-backed government. Ever since, Kenya has become a target for terror activities. They reached a new peak last September in the Westgate Mall attack in the capital of Nairobi, an incident that cost the lives of 68 people. Now, when the jihadist group again wreaks havoc, residents of the small town of Pekentoni are considering leaving their homes.
People decided to sleep in the forest because they were fearing, because in fact they were moving from door to door.
I feel desperate because the police, they are not coming, and I was not hoping that they will come. So the only way I could do is to try and escape.
The massacre in Pekentoni has abruptly ended the peaceful atmosphere in this quiet town, mostly known as a tourism spot. And while world attention is focused on Iraq and Syria, Kenyan government is struggling to find a solution.
And now to sports. And with me now is I-24 News football analyst Yoav Borowitz. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
Happy World Cup months.
Yeah, you're enjoying?
Yes, I am. I want to enjoy. I really want, but
You're too busy.
Yeah, and I end up just watching the reruns.
When you have
which
time.
Which is not that fun, I have to say.
Yeah, football you gotta watch live,
yes,
but if you don't know the score, you can still watch it later.
Yeah, so let's start by talking about Spain and the first stage.
Yeah, let's talk about the first stage that's concluded tonight. And I think the biggest game of the first stage, no doubt, was Holland-Spain 5-1, because, you know, Lucy, Spain, world champions, European champions, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid, an empire of football, plays against Holland, the team that lost to Spain 4 years ago in the finals in South Africa.
A big revenge
you know what the Bedouins say about
2010 World
You know what
Cup.
the Bedouins say about serving a revenge cold? That's what the Dutch did. That's what the Dutch did 4 years later, 5-1 in the biggest stage. Yet, still the first game, but Arjen Robin van Persie just had a tremendous game. The whole world now is expecting Holland maybe to go all the way.
So let's now talk about a little bit about the American team against Ghana.
Yeah, American team played Ghana last night. Joe Biden came to watch the game. You know, Ghana were favorites. It's probably the best African team. U.S., we know it's great basketball, baseball, football, hockey, but we never talk about the U.S. and soccer. But still, with a German coach, the legendary Jürgen Klinsmann, U.S. played a very courageous game, very defensive game, but they won heroically. It was a big deal. A lot of fans came to Brazil to celebrate with the American team. It was a very nice win.
I got to tell you that when it's the Americans are playing, I never watch it because
You're not emotionally attached.
I'm not emotionally attached because first of all they call football
Soccer.
Soccer.
Right, because
so
they
for
have
them,
another
this is
game.
Not football.
They have another game which they throw in the hands and they call it football. But you know,
explain this to me because I don't understand this.
But soccer in America is growing, especially with women, but now also with men. Let's talk about last thing, Brazil, because they're hosting Brazil, 5-time champions, the land of football. Brazil played a first game, was a good game. They won 3-1. But you know the problem, Lucy, with Brazil in the last few years, that it's a one-man show. And this man is Neymar. And Neymar scored 2 goals in the first game. In an hour, they're starting their second game against Mexico. Let's see if it's only Neymar coming to play or are the other players as well.
How come you didn't speak about Germany?
Germany, because the Germans always win. It's a bit boring.
Are you a fan of Germany?
I'm not a big fan, but I got to respect them. You know, they won 4-0 against the great Cristiano Ronaldo in Portugal. But the Germans are just good, you know, and they're very consistent.
It was a very good game I had. It was an amazing game. I saw the rerun. It was a good game. It was. I love football. I love the World Cup.
So we started when you're not watching, and now we love it.
No. I'm saying that I love.
You just need to spare some time and watch those games because they're amazing so far.
Yes. Okay. So let me be precise. I love football in the World Cup.
I know you love
not
it.
afterwards. Jawohl, thank you very much.
Thank you.
At least one person is dead and 19 injured after 2 massive tornadoes devastated a small town in the United States of Nebraska. The I-24 News Desk has the latest.
There is little left of Pilger. This U.S. farm village was no match to several tornadoes, part of a supercell thunderstorm system that struck several farming communities in northeast Nebraska on Monday, killing at least 1 person and injuring 16. Forecast said winds reached a peak of 265 kilometers per hour. Local authorities said Pilger, a community several blocks wide and home to roughly 350 residents, appeared to bear the brunt of the storms. Buildings across a several-block area were leveled with debris strewn across the streets.
The village of Pilger is basically what we would say a majority of this village is destroyed. We do have 1 known fatality in Pilger, as well as several critical currently at a hospital in Norfolk.
In addition to the 16 patients from Pilger, local media reported 9 others injured were treated at 3 other area hospitals. Weather officials said additional funnel clouds were detected in central Nebraska, behind the first wave of storms that appeared to dissipate as they moved eastward before crossing the Missouri River into Iowa.
Now to economy. And with me now is financial analyst Lionel Friedfeld. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
And we're still speaking about and talking about the World Cup, but now from the German point of view.
German from a technology point of view, because you all watch the game and there is a new system when the balls come into a goal, there is a line, and this time there's a German startup that invented a new concept.
What is the startup?
The startup is called goal control, and
goal
it's control exactly, and it's telling when there is finally a goal or not a goal, because sometimes there is dot, and this time with a few display of camera, they send information, and basically they know exactly when there is a goal or there is not a goal.
So this is what helped them in the last night game?
The last night game, the first time it happened, it was France against Honduras. It was the first time it was used in a game in the World Cup. It's a huge innovation. It's the first time it happens in the World Cup. So this is very interesting. The startup was created in 2012, and actually it's a small German engineer that invented the company, and they were competing against giants like Sony that developed the same system that was called the Hawkeye, and also Adidas, a GLTS system. It's actually a small German startup that won the contract, few $1 million, but you already have 50 people working from the company in the World Cup for them.
So how does it work exactly? And let's translate it to money. How much does it cost?
Yeah, very simple. You got 7 cameras always watching the 2 goals, sending more than 500 pictures every second with a precision of 5 millimeters. So, you know, we can exactly know when the ball is going on the line or not. And basically when the ball is going through beyond the line, it's sending one message on the, actually it's a watch, which is given to the referee. And there is a big message popping up saying goal or no goal.
And money-wise?
Money-wise, this startup is going to do very good because they're going to use it in European Championship, in the US, or in Asia for different sports, and it costs in between 200,000 euro and 300,000 euros. So the company is going to make a lot of money.
Lionel Friedfeld, thank you very much for this, and also thank you for our correspondents in the field reporting in English, Arabic, and French, of course, all night, all day. Our reporters on the ground. And we are going out for a small break, 2 minutes break, 4 minutes break, and then we will be back with the I-24 News Daily Debate, where we will talk about Iraq this time. Don't go anywhere.